Hey guys. This is part 2 of What If Naruto Was in Transformers. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 6. Naruto was trying very hard not to laugh. However, his task was getting harder and harder to accomplish. The blonde desperately tried to stifle his laughter, hand not so discreetly over his mouth. No, I can't fail now. He'll kill me if I do. You're a ninja. You can do this. Then he threw one short glance at the person standing in front of him, and totally lost it. Uzumaki Naruto burst out laughing so loud the whole base must have heard him. And probably the next base too, if there was any other secret military bases with aliens hiding nearby. In front of him, Kakashi-sensei shot him the fiercest death glare he could. It probably would have caused some enemies to flee if they had been in a battle, but that only made Naruto laugh even harder. What, pray tell? His sensei's silky voice was a clear sign that he was about to strangle his student, who was practically rolling on the floor laughing. Are you finding so funny, Naruto? Naruto gasped for breath and tried to get a hold of himself, failing miserably and starting to giggle manically. His teacher's eye narrowed dangerously, but it really didn't have the desired effect, not when he was dressed like that. Oh, Naruto wasn't going to let his sensei live this down. Ever. That day the two ninjas had slept considerably later than the day before, as they knew there would be no more enlightening conversations awaiting them this time. Naruto had been asleep till late morning, happily snoring in the sleeping bag Miko and company had brought for them. His teacher had been already up when he woke up, sitting cross-legged on his makeshift bed and reading that stupid book of his. That white Autobot, Smokescreen if he remembered the name correctly, had visited them around midday, informing them that the kids had school today, they still have to go to school, and wouldn't be around before about 3 in the afternoon. The robot had also brought them lunch, unfortunately not hamburgers, though Kakashi-sensei hadn't seemed to be even a bit disappointed with the lack of fast food. After lunch they had encountered a new problem: clothes. It was really no problem to wear the same uniform during a mission, as they would get dirty anyway, just like all the other members in the team. But when being actually inside in the presence of other people, the worn uniforms quite quickly became uncomfortable for everyone. Fortunately, the kids had already foreseen that. There had been a bunch of spare clothes for the ninjas to wear in the bags brought the previous morning. Apparently the 3 teenagers had collected old clothes from home for the good cause. Naturally, Kakashi-sensei, the great copy ninja of the Sharingan eye, had also had to change his appearance. And that was the reason why Naruto was currently in grave danger to choke on his own laughter. The Jounin was wearing faded blue jeans that were somehow little too short and little too wide, held up by a simple belt. The white t-shirt was a few sizes too big for him and had some letters on it, with a red heart in the middle. According to Miko, it meant "I love New York." Naruto couldn't remember what New York was. He would have to remember to ask that sometime. Naruto had always thought his teacher looked quite young, even under the baggy ninja garments and despite his silver hair. Now, with the civilian clothes a little too big, the Jounin sensei looked like a gray-haired teenager in a mask. Naruto, on the other hand, had jeans with trouser legs only slightly rolled up and a simple t-shirt, unfortunately not orange but dark green, that Kakashi had called normal clothes. I wish so much I had a camera right now, Naruto gasped, trying to stop another fit of laughter from escaping. The Jounin glared at him with all his might, his left eye tightly shut as he wore no headband yet. Come on, Naruto. His teacher's voice was just a little desperate, the fierce attitude changing into almost a miserable one. It can't be that bad. The shirt has a heart on it. A red heart. If only his teammates could see this too. Naruto practically collapsed to the floor, howling with laughter. Kakashi-sensei tried to scoff indignantly, glaring at his student venomously. Naruto just laughed louder. When we get back to Konoha, I'm going to make you run laps around the village until your legs give out. The copy Nin threatened. And then you get to run them again. Would be worth it. Kakashi-sensei sighed in exasperation and gave his student a pointed glare. Come on now, brat. We have actually some work to do this morning. Naruto made a great effort to calm down and got up from the floor, stifling the last giggles. Kakashi-sensei rolled his eye. Naruto, still smiling his foxy smile, crossed his hands behind his head and asked, Sure, sensei. So what are we gonna do? Kakashi strode to his Jounin vest, which had been discarded with other clothes beside the wall. Beside it on the floor were his pouch and the weapon holster. He quickly snatched a kunai from the holster, and then returned to Naruto, who was waiting eagerly for him in the middle of the room. Have you found out a way to get a contact to home, Sensei? The boy asked excitedly, practically bouncing up and down. Kakashi shrugged. Not sure, but I think this will be worth a try, he said, swinging the kunai around in his hand. You're gonna summon your nindogs? Naruto's face lit up after a moment of confusion. Then he frowned a little, squinting his eyes suspiciously. You sure you got enough chakra for that already, Sensei? It would be a total drag if you passed out again or something. Kakashi raised one silver eyebrow. Of course I have enough chakra, Naruto. Otherwise I wouldn't be trying this, the Jounin lied smoothly. When he said he had recovered enough for this stunt, he actually meant I will probably be still alive, and maybe even conscious after trying this. If Sakura had been there with them, she would probably have smelled her teacher's lies and batted him in the head for being so irresponsible. But in life, some risks would just have to be taken. Naruto, however, believed him blindly. Well, Sensei, what are you waiting for then? I can't wait to see Pakken again. Though he is quite grumpy. But don't tell him I said that. Kakashi cut the tip of his finger with the kunai. Then he went through the familiar hand signs and slammed his hand to the ground. Kuchios no jutsu. Nothing happened. Naruto stared at his teacher for a moment before exclaiming, Where's Pakken? The blonde boy looked around in the room as if the Nindog could suddenly jump behind the tables or stroll through the door. Kakashi frowned. Why the hell didn't it work? He was sure he had enough chakra now. The Jounin's hands flew through the seals again, repeating the technique. Still, the room remained dog-free. Kakashi ran a hand through his hair, the one that didn't have the cut on it, and stared the place at the floor where his summon should have appeared. Maybe jutsus don't work in this place, Naruto said, his voice revealing his discomfort at the horrifying thought. Kakashi quickly did the seals for a simple bunshin. The copy puffed into existence right next to him. No, that's not it, the Jounin said, still frowning, and dispelled the bunshin. Maybe you just didn't have the chakra. I had the chakra, the Jounin interrupted. I've done it before like this, and it has always worked. That's not it. They both stayed silent for a while. Kakashi didn't like this at all. He had always been able to summon his pack. They had helped him out from many tough situations. His summons were something he could always trust to if he just had the chakra to call them to him. They had always been there for him. He suddenly felt very alone. Maybe we are just too far away, Naruto said in a conversational tone. You know, the blonde shrugged. The dimension stuff. Maybe summoning techniques don't reach all the way there. I mean, it took quite a lot of chakra to get us here too. Naruto quieted down, scratching the back of his head. Kakashi was silent for a moment. Not bad, Naruto. That could be highly likely. We still have chakra, so despite the dimension, we can still use it. But home is just too far away to easily get a contact to. Naruto nodded happily. Then he narrowed his sky-blue eyes accusingly. You were surprised. The Jounin's eyebrows rose. What? You didn't think I'd figure out something like that? Kakashi couldn't help but laugh. I'm just getting back at you for laughing at my clothes. Naruto huffed in indignation, but soon grinned again. Well, your clothes just are so. Yes, I know, Kakashi interrupted exasperatedly. No need to rub that in my face anymore. Why don't you instead go and see if your friends are back from school already? Naruto smirked at him, but started towards the door. Sure, Sensei. See you later then. And the boy strolled out of the room. Kakashi could hear him talking to their current guard outside before the muffled echo of footsteps disappeared. For a moment the Jounin just stood there, contemplating their newest discoveries about the situation. No help from the summons then. They would just have to live with that then. The copy Nin snatched the pouch from beside the wall and tied it to his belt. Then he picked up his Hittite from top of the pile of discarded clothes. He went to the steel tables on the other side of the room and gently lowered the headband onto it, metal plate upwards. He took a step back and stuffed his hands, now without gloves. He felt kind of weird without them, in his pockets. For a while he just stared at the headband, the little dents and scratches on its silvery surface, the smoothly carved leaf symbol in the center. Silent seconds ticked by. Well, Obito, Kakashi started in a quiet tone that couldn't be heard outside the room. It's been a while. He ran a hand through his hair. Sorry I haven't been able to visit you, Rin and Sensei, for a while, but you see. His unscarred eye formed a happy crescent. There's been some, unpredictable, to say the very, very least, happenings lately. The elite shinobi opened his eye and gazed at the Hittite. So no morning trips to the memorial then? This is the closest I can get. You would have liked it here. Well, maybe not at this stuffy base. But I'm sure you would have wanted to meet them. All the new people, and the Autobots of course. I never thought I'd be this far from home someday. The silver-haired man chuckled to himself. And I know you're probably laughing at my stupid clothes right now. I mean, someone has actually bought these ridiculous things. But guess it could be a lot worse, right? At least I had a spare mask with me, he sighed a little. But I should get going now, or they'll start to wonder why I'm staying behind. RC will get suspicious again. The copy-mean stepped to the table and took the headband into his hand, running his thumb over the symbol carved onto the metal plate. Then he tied it to its place, tugging the other side down so it was once again hiding the scarred eyelid. Sorry for not being able to stay longer today. I'll be back again when I can. Then he left the room. The roar of engine was like a prelude for the certainly upcoming racket. A large green truck raced from the tunnel, tires screeching as the vehicle braked, stopping neatly in the middle of the room. 3 teenagers jumped out and Bulkhead swiftly transformed back to his robot form. Skull's over, Miko cheered, punching the air, and miraculously, someone didn't even get detention. Jack said, a smile tugging his lips. Hey, I don't get detention that often. Only when teachers are being overly boring. And when are they not, according to you? I said overly boring, not just usual boring. The good-natured bickering continued. Raphael spotted Bumblebee on the edge of the room and ran to the yellow bot. Hey B, how about a race? The scout chirped happily and nodded eagerly, and the two started towards the television. And so the kids were back at the base, and the volume levels had magically shot up to the clouds. Ratchet suppressed the urge to slam his head to the screens. The heavenly moments of silence were once again history. Well, at least he had gotten quite a lot of work done. Hey Ratch, Bulkhead greeted, walking to stand beside the white medic. Ratchet hummed in response, slightly narrowing his optics while gazing at the displays. Any progress? The white mech sighed. Well, some, I think. Though I don't think it will be any good news for our guests. Oh. What is it? Where's Naruto? Miko shouted, leaning to the railings of the upper level of the room. They haven't left anywhere, have they? Not without us. Of course not. Ratchet replied exasperatedly. They're at their room. Smokescreen told them when you'd be returning, so I think they'll be here soon. Miko cheered again, running back to her friends at the couch. The kids sure are excited, huh? Bulkhead laughed. You don't say, Ratchet muttered to himself. As if having heard the conversation, Naruto appeared into the room, dressed in jeans and t-shirt instead of his usual outfit. His face lit up when he saw that the teenagers were present too. Hi! Miko yelled in Japanese, waving from the upper level. Come here. You gotta try this game B and Raph are playing. The blonde ninja ran to them in a heartbeat, and soon the room was filled with cheerful chatter and incredulous no way as the teens showed the game to Naruto. Where are the others? Bulkhead asked from the medic. Smokescreen is probably waiting for Hataki. Optimus and RC went to check the relics not so long ago. It wasn't long until the other ninja pretty much stalked to the room, amused Smokescreen on his heels. Kakashi-sensei, Naruto hollered from the couches. You have to try this game thing. It's a car race. Maybe later, Naruto, the gray-haired man replied. He then trotted to Ratchet and Bulkhead, hands in his pockets, and greeted them with a laid-back afternoon. Smokescreen waved his hand, halting beside Bulkhead. The ninja looked kind of funny, Ratchet had to admit, wearing the t-shirt and shabby jeans with his mask and headband still firmly in place. And somehow the otherwise indifferent expression in his uncovered eye clearly told not to make any comments about his current clothing, an expression Bulkhead apparently failed to notice. What happened to your clothes? The green mech asked in a slightly confused tone. Ratchet stifled the urge to facepalm. Smokescreen snickered. There was a quick flash of annoyed mortification in the man's dark eye. Kinda had to change them, he answered curtly. Ratchet hid a smile. I assume you're going to ask if there have been any improvements. The medic swiftly changed the topic. Kakashi nodded, seemingly ever so slightly relieved that the attention had shifted from his I Love New York shirt to other issues. Have there been any? The ninja inquired. Though his tone wasn't actually hopeful, the white bot still sensed some eagerness for information, and maybe even good news. Well, I've gotten some research done, Ratchet admitted, turning to face the displays. Hataki moved to stand beside him, head tilted upwards to gaze at the screens. I've made some calculations, the medic began, about the ground bridges. The case with the kids back then indicates it is possible to travel through dimensions via bridges. However, Ratchet saw as the ninja's dark eye narrowed slightly as the man listened intently. Reality is not that simple. Only to travel to a dimension slightly different to ours demanded twice as much energon as a simple ground bridge. To travel farther, to a completely different dimension, we would need to multiply our whole stock of energon. The medic glanced at the silver-haired man beside him. And it's not just about the amount of energy needed. It's also about the aim. We need to get you to the right dimension. and with enough force. Otherwise, well, Ratchet looked at the ninja with serious gaze, you will not make it all the way there. And that would be unhealthy. The masked man still had his hands in his pockets, Ratchet noted, but his posture was tense. Bulkhead stood silently behind them. Well, that's a drag, Smokescreen commented, but it could be done with the bridge, at least, Kakashi stated, rubbing his masked chin. I believe so, the medic said. It probably needs some modifications to work correctly. I'll look into it to get more precise info, Hataki nodded curtly, and in the meantime I assume we're pretty much stuck in here, am I right? Yes, Ratchet agreed. It's the best for you to stay at the base. We don't know if the Decepticons are still looking for you. Kakashi nodded again, but Ratchet was sure the man thought that wasn't all. Like it wasn't. But it was just too risky to let the two ninjas wander around outside. It was just like begging for something bad to happen, and they still hadn't told them certain things about themselves. Kakashi-sensei, are you coming or not? Naruto bellowed impatiently from the other side of the room. The masked man sighed in slight exasperation. Bulkhead and Smokescreen laughed. I'll continue my research, Ratchet said, a small smile on his lips. I'll see if the energy problem could be somehow solved. Thank you for your help, Ratchet-san, Hataki said with a small bow. We are in great debt. Ratchet dismissed the words with a wave of his hand. Just glad to help. As the spiky-haired man strolled towards the blonde boy waving from the upper level, Ratchet couldn't help but wonder how long the two ninjas would agree to stay hiding at the base. Somehow he had a feeling it wouldn't be as long as he would hope for. Chapter 7. Naruto was bored. It was already Friday. That meant they had been at the base for almost a week. And that whole week they'd been spending all of their time in the Autobot base without even a glance at the outside world. He was a ninja, damn it! He wasn't supposed to be confined inside four walls in some desolate base buried underground. He wasn't supposed to sit all day in some stuffy base with nothing to do. Well, that wasn't entirely true. Of course he had things to do, just not the usual things. No missions and no training, at least not nearly as much as he had had before. Seriously, staying inside all day long, and all days, was starting to get him a real cabin fever. He wanted to get out. He wanted to breathe the fresh air and see the sun again. He wanted to see some trees like he had seen every day in Konoha. He wanted to go and visit all the places in this new world he had gotten into. He wanted to do something useful. The days had passed with varying speed. At the start of the week, Miko had gotten them the language books Kakashi-sensei had asked for, and his teacher had insisted that they would concentrate mainly on them now. It was so boring, like being at school all over again. Well, of course it was better to have even something to do instead of just hanging around. Though, it always was fun to talk with the Autobots. Even though Ratchet was a little grumpy, especially if he was disturbed during whatever work he was doing, and RC eyed the ninjas with slight suspicion every now and then. Basketball matches between Bulkhead and Bumblebee were always fun to watch, and Smokescreen never grew tired of telling amazing stories about battles he had fought in, and how many Decepticons he had beaten up. Naruto had even exchanged a few words with Optimus Prime, though he still thought the tall robot was kind of scary with that powerful leader aura of his. But Naruto had ranked the Autobot leader on about the same level with the Hokage, which automatically equaled awesome. When Jack, Raph and Miko were at the base, he always had a good time. The teens had shown him some absolutely cool things that apparently were quite ordinary in this world. Like Miko's electrical guitar, Kakashi-sensei hadn't been amused at all, and Raph's weird little machine called laptop. Yesterday the blonde ninja had found Jack and Raph doing something with the computer, and according to Jack, once again translated by Miko, they had been removing photographs of Bumblebee from something called Internet. Naruto still didn't understand what it actually was, despite Jack and Raphael's attempts to explain it to him, and replacing them with talking cats and other weird things. Apparently every now and then somebody managed to catch a glimpse of the robots, and the teens were happy to get rid of the photos whenever they found them. With the internet, Naruto had learned, one could do quite a many things. Like play even more games. The racing game had been so much fun. The three teenagers had also started to show him photos of the outside world, which was something Naruto had found overly entertaining. Miko had been utterly enthusiastic to tell him all about the photos. That's Jasper, our hometown. It's a kind of a boring place, nothing really happens there. That's Tokyo, in Japan, where I come from. I'm here just as an exchange student, you know. Here's a picture from Greece. I were there once with Bulkhead. We had this super cool mission. Oh, and that is New York City. Ooh, so that was what it had meant. Even Kakashi-sensei had been interested. The Jounin had been peeking over Raph's shoulder, staring intently at the screen and everything that had been happening on it. Raphael had been quite intimidated by the ninja's sudden proximity. Naruto had been staring at the display for so long his eyes had become all red and itchy, so that had been enough of computers for a while then. And because it would have been totally foolish for a ninja to neglect the training, regardless the situation, he and Kakashi-sensei had sparred a couple of times, honing their taijutsu skills after the small break. Once before an audience because Naruto and his new friends had talked the Jounin sensei into it. The other teens had been quite impressed, and Miko had immediately demanded Naruto to teach her some of those awesome ninja moves they had used. Okay, so the past days had been fun. But it wasn't enough to ease the growing sense of being trapped underground with those same walls around him every single day. Kakashi-sensei was probably sick and tired of listening to his never-ending inquiries whether they could go outside already. Naruto could understand why they couldn't just go strolling outside, as Kakashi-sensei and the Autobots had explained it. The place was supposed to be abandoned, and the team of alien robots really didn't need any more risks of being discovered. Oh, and then there were the Decepticon folk who probably would try to snatch away both Naruto and his teacher if they just got the smallest of chances. But they had recovered a lot of their chakra reserves already. So next time they faced off the bad guys it would be very different. Surely a small peek outside wouldn't hurt, right? He could just sneak out and take a look at their surroundings and return, and nobody would be any wiser. Maybe he could have done that if they still weren't almost always under the watchful eye of some of the Autobots. And there was always someone in the room with the tunnel entrance, and Kakashi-sensei's strict orders were not to use any jutsus. Well, sneaky ninja techniques hadn't ever been his strength anyway, but he still was the #1 unpredictable ninja. He would find a way to sneak out, even for just a little while. He would just have to wait for the perfect opportunity. Man, this is so hard. Kakashi didn't bother to answer. Naruto had complained for the last half an hour about how hard, boring and stupid language English was. The Jounin couldn't help but roll his eye every time he heard a bored and exasperated huff from the direction of his blonde student. He had been right when assuming Naruto wouldn't be too enthusiastic to really try to learn the new language. He took a quick peek over the top of his own language book and glanced at Naruto, who sat cross-legged on the floor not far from him, squinting his eyes at the Japanese English textbook in his hands. He was again wearing his usual and now clean outfit just like Kakashi. The copy Nin had been euphoric, though he hadn't shown it, of course, about being able to wear the Jounin uniform again. He had felt rather uncomfortable without it. Ninjas just weren't supposed to walk around in silly t-shirts with hearts on them. I mean, the boy turned the book in his hands, glaring at the text inside. Who could have possibly come up with a language like this? The letters make no sense. They're just different, the copy Nin said without really trying to convince the boy anymore. He had been trying to motivate his student whole week without any real success. You just have to memorize them, and then the rest gets a little easier. But that's it, I can't remember them, the boy wailed. And look at this. He jabbed his finger at the book, scowling at whatever he was looking at on the pages. How can that one even be a word? It's probably just random letters in a row. How could anyone even try to pronounce that? Treat it as a mission, the Hataki suggested a little wearily. An A rank if you like. Well, it would still be a stupid A rank mission. The boy glared at him, and the Jounin chuckled. Kakashi retreated back behind his language book. Naruto would just have to survive from this. At least the current exercise was great patience practice. There was another bored sigh. The blonde probably refused to learn anything out of sheer stubbornness. Kakashi wondered how the staff in the academy had managed to teach anything to the boy. Ha! The boy suddenly yelled. You're having difficulties too. That's like the third time you're reading that same book. HN had to revise some things, he lied smoothly. He took another glance over his book. Maybe you would actually learn something if you would for once actually concentrate on what you're doing. That's mean, sensei. Nobody should be forced to try to memorize these things. Kakashi ignored his student. He had other matters to focus on right now anyway. Naruto was right. He actually had read the book he was currently feigning to read. He had read all of the books Miko had hauled to the base, some of them more than once. The letters had been a little hard to learn first, but he wasn't called a genius for nothing and had memorized them in a relatively short time. He thought he had improved quite nicely, absorbing all the information from the available pile of textbooks. His vocabulary was steadily increasing, and while it would have probably sounded no less than horrible if he tried to actually speak it, he could already almost understand some written texts if they weren't too complex. His improved language skills had enabled him his new favorite pastime, eavesdropping. There was a reason he was currently pretending to struggle with the new language. He had come to the conclusion that it would be far more useful for them if the Autobots still thought they didn't know a word in English. Naruto's antics were for once helpful, as the boys' loud complaining made it even more like they both had to make a huge effort to learn the new language. And as the Autobots still used English whenever talking among themselves, Kakashi could nicely pretend he was reading and listen to the conversation unnoticed. Though large deals of the discussions were spoken in words which meaning he had no idea about, he still sometimes managed to understand at least something. Listening to the Autobots talk had also been great practice. He had once tried to translate Miko's ramblings, but had quickly deducted that it would require much more than simply being a genius to decipher the girl's lightning-fast chatter. He knew the Autobots wouldn't probably be too glad to discover his new hobby, and the copying felt his conscience sting a little at the thought of spying the ones that had offered them a sanctuary. But he was a ninja by heart, and had been on active duty for over 2 decades. It was his job to gather information in situations like this. That was also the reason why he hadn't, despite Naruto's growing demands, told their new acquaintances about chakra and jutsus. He just wasn't supposed to. Keeping things secret was what he did. What he had always done, Kakashi sighed. And it wasn't like the Autobots weren't keeping an eye on them too. The Jounin hadn't made it this far if he hadn't reacted to new situations with a healthy sense of suspicion that admittedly sometimes did tilt to the direction of downright paranoia. Kakashi banished the distracting thoughts and concentrated on the conversation going on between the Autobots. Sensitive hearing became rather useful in situations like this, he thought, when blocking out Naruto's complaining and focusing on listening to the discussion. He couldn't keep this up for long anyway, as the robots would, without a doubt, soon decide it would be too risky to have any important conversations with the 2 ninjas present. His body language gave no sign that his focus had been directed to totally different directions than the textbook in his hands. Every now and then he flipped the page, eyes focused on a blank spot on the book and listening intently. Nothing too important. Something about fetching the kids from school, later today probably. Something about the Decepticons. Kakashi wasn't sure if he had gotten that right, but he assumed the Autobots hadn't heard from their nemesis for a while. And the robots were getting a little anxious, going by the tones of their voices. Kakashi narrowed his eyes, turning a page in his book but straining his ears to hear more. He was sure he had heard a word there the Autobots had used relatively often before. Oh, there it was again. There were lots of other words which meaning he didn't know or had missed, but he was rather sure he had caught one. He snatched a Japanese-English dictionary from the floor and continued to ignore Naruto's grumbling. He flipped the thick book open, for a moment contemplating the spelling and scanning his memory for the right letters. Then he flipped the pages until he got to R and then E and started looking for the word. After a moment of search he thought he had found the right one. Relic. He stared at the word, brow furrowing ever so slightly. Why would they be talking about that? Maybe he had gotten the spelling wrong. But he was fairly sure this was the right one. Kakashi closed the dictionary and put it aside, continuing to hide behind the textbook. The Autobots didn't come across as folk who would collect memoirs and keepsakes. That didn't make any sense, not when the robot's whole existence was uncertain. He had gotten the image the Autobots were more like soldiers than anything, so he doubted there would be space for mere souvenirs in their life. Unless there was more to it, and there was that part of the base that hadn't been introduced to them. Kakashi-sensei, are you even listening to me? Kakashi lowered the book slightly so he could look at his student. Naruto seemed to be on the verge of pure anguish. The kid clearly was someone who learned by doing, not by reading. Sorry, Naruto, the copy ninja crinkled in a smile. This part was kind of hard. He waved the textbook in his hands. His mind was totally elsewhere as he listened to Naruto's complaining how impossible it was to even try to learn the weird language. RC was standing beside the wall, absent-mindedly listening to the conversation taking place at the computers. Or in other words, listening to Bulkhead and Bumblebee's chatter, while Ratchet pretty much tried to ignore the other two. It was still early afternoon, so the kids were not yet at the base. Their guests were currently absent too, having left the room with Smokescreen and their textbooks a while ago. She still wasn't happy about the situation, but RC wasn't going to complain about something they had already decided together. Prime was sure the ninjas would open up once they realized they were not going to be double-crossed or betrayed. RC just hoped their leader would be right. The Prime usually was. She was getting tired hosting these secretive soldiers like she had told Hataki almost a week ago, though the silver-haired man hadn't seemed to be even slightly intimidated by her words. And she was sure the masked ninja was up to something. She would keep an eye on him so when he finally tried something, she just knew he would. RC would catch him red-handed. Her inner musings were abruptly interrupted as there was a sound coming from the computers Ratchet was currently operating. What is it, Ratchet? RC asked, moving closer to the displays. The medic narrowed his eyes. It's a signal from. The blue optics widened in surprise. From Wheeljack. Jackie? Bulkhead hollered, nearly shoving the medic aside as he stomped to stand before the screens. You sure it's him? RC asked warily. Hello again, Doc. The wrecker's familiar voice echoed through the room. Care to set up the ground bridge for me? That sure is Jackie. Bulkhead laughed after hearing his friend's voice. RC saw Ratchet rolling his eyes at the huge green mech while checking the identification beacon and the coordinates. The ground bridge was soon ready and the medic hit the switch. The green portal flared to life before them. It wasn't long until the familiar figure of Wheeljack appeared from the glow, slowly walking to the room as the ground bridge disappeared behind him. Jackie! Bulkhead bellowed, instantly grabbing the white wrecker into a metal-crushing hug. Long time no see, eh? Wheeljack chuckled as he was lowered back to the ground. Great to have you back again, Jackie. Bulkhead laughed, slapping his friend on the shoulder. The newly arrived wrecker's attention shifted to other presences in the room. Hi, Doc! Wheeljack greeted Ratchet with a laugh. Thanks for the bridge. It would have been a long drive. Ratchet waved his hand without turning around from the computers. Bumblebee chirped happily and RC nodded a greeting. She noted the wrecker looked a little battered. His white paintwork covered in scratches and a few more serious-looking cuts. Where's Prime? Wheeljack asked, glancing around the base. On patrol. He should be back soon, RC answered. As Wheeljack was someone who didn't usually hang around the missile silo, she couldn't help but ask. So what brings you here today? I had a little run-in with the cons. Took some nasty damage, so I wondered if Doc here could patch me up. Not that I'd really need it. Just thought you might miss me by now. Well, don't call me Doc then. Ratchet snapped indignantly, for a moment turning to face and glare the other bot. Or I just might leave you to rust someday, the warrior laughed. Sure thing, Doc. Ratchet grumbled something about a ruffian and bad manners. So, the white wrecker drawled. What have you been up to lately? Anything interesting to tell? Well, Bulkhead started, and then, Hatake Kakashi chose that exact moment to stroll to the room. The ninja stopped dead on his tracks as soon as he saw the wrecker standing not far from him, the lone gray eye widening. Wheeljack frowned and turned around, noticing the ninja standing in front of the corridor entrance. What the? How many humans do you keep down here nowadays? RC noted there was a slightest of scowls visible on Hatake's masked face, as if he had understood something of the words spoken though it had been in English. But the look was gone in a flash. And who might you be? The man asked evenly in Japanese, arching one silver eyebrow and looking up at the bot. If Wheeljack was surprised of the sudden language change, he didn't show it. Name's Wheeljack, an occupation, one of the last few wreckers around. The white mech took a step towards the man. And you are? Hatake Kakashi, came the smooth answer. A shinobi. A ninja, eh? Wheeljack snorted. In a one swift move he had drawn one of his swords, the deadly blade being taller than the silver-haired man. You know, I could cut you in half in less than a second, little man. The Hatake met his gaze with admirable indifference. He suddenly had one of his knives in his hand, spinning it in lazy circles. And I could have this buried in your eye in less time than that, he stated matter-of-factly. For a moment the room was silent as the two warriors glared at each other. Ratchet followed the encounter with a frown. Bulkhead looked slightly worried. The tense atmosphere stretched, and RC was just about to try and explain the situation before something bad would happen when the white wrecker suddenly let out a loud rumbling laugh. I like this new guy, he said with a grin. You got the spirit, don't you, little man? The wrecker seemed like he would have slapped the ninja on the back if that probably hadn't led to quite a few broken bones. Nice to meet you, Hatake Kakashi. Hatake looked a little confused first at the sudden change in the other's attitude, but then offered a slight smile, or at least his eye curved in that funny way. Likewise. The dagger had already disappeared from view, RC explained, with a little help from Ratchet with the more scientific information and theories, the current situation with their interdimensional visitors. Wheeljack let out a bark of laughter. From another dimension? Hadn't heard that one before. And Megatron is after you already? You've been busy. Tough luck. Kakashi rolled his eye. RC couldn't help but chuckle. Though nothing has happened in a while, she said. The cons have been disturbingly quiet. That usually means they are just up to something nasty again, so you better watch your backs, Wheeljack scoffed. Then his attention shifted back to the ninja standing beside him. So you have a friend here too? Hatake nodded. My student. He should be here soon. If possible, that boy is even louder than Miko, Ratchet mumbled. My audio receptors are starting to get abused, Wheeljack laughed. Abused? So he's even worse than Soundwave with a resonance blaster? Ratchet ignored him. The wrecker grinned, returning his gaze to the ninja again. Well then I think we're gonna get along just fine. Chapter 8. How, by the Allspark, did you manage to get injured like this? Wheeljack scoffed, ignoring the medic's scowl. Ran into some Insecticons a short while ago. Nasty pests. One of them managed to land a lucky hit. Ratchet rolled his optics, scanning the huge scratch across the wrecker's chest, probably a souvenir from the Insecticon's claws. Do I even want to know what you were doing? Wheeljack grinned at him. Just looking for some action document. You know how boring it can get. The medic glared at his patient, contemplating if he should scold him for calling him Doc again, but decided to leave it in favor of chiding the wrecker about his rash behavior instead. You deliberately search for trouble and then come here to get patched up when necessary. Is that what you are saying? Wheeljack laughed. You got it, Doc. Ratchet refused to say any more as he would probably just get more irritated. He continued to study the wounds. Luckily it wouldn't take too long for the wounds to heal. He had just started to work on the largest gash when there was a loud beeping sound coming from the computers. Don't go wandering around, the medic told the wrecker, who snorted loudly. Sure thing, Doc. Ratchet swiftly walked to the computers to check the status. Smokescreen was once again lobbing with Bulkhead, making awful lot of noise with that stupid scrap ball of theirs, Wheeljack eyeing them enviously. Bumblebee was talking with Optimus, and the scout was enthusiastically telling something to their stoic leader, waving his hands animatedly. The only one absent was RC, who had left to scout the area not too long ago. Their ninja guests had, after meeting Wheeljack, retreated back to their room. Ratchet narrowed his eyes at the screens before making a surprised noise. It's an Autobot identification beacon. There was a loud thunk as Bulkhead dropped the scrap ball. A what? Ratchet was quickly working on the computer, attempting to make contact with the possible Autobot refugee. According to the beacon, the signal was coming from northern Alaska, in the middle of wilderness. The other Autobots gathered behind him to follow the situation. Are you able to contact them, Ratchet? Optimus asked, staring at the displays with the flashing dot on the map. I'll try, the medic said. Then he cleared his voice box and started. This is Outpost Omega 1, do you copy? There was no response. This is Ratchet of Team Prime. What's your status? Nothing. It could be a trap, Ratchet said, turning to face the others. It wouldn't be the first time the Decepticons used an Autobot identification beacon to lure us out. But we can't be sure, Prime said in a grave tone. We can't overlook it if there's even a small chance that there is a fellow Autobot out there, asking for our assistance. Optimus looked at his team. Bulkhead, Bumblebee, Smokescreen, get ready to roll. Yes, I'd been waiting for some action since forever. The medic rolled his optics at Smokescreen's over-enthusiasm. Seriously, the rookie would end up in spare parts someday soon if he wouldn't get more responsible. Speaking of irresponsible bots. So, when do we leave? Wheeljack strolled to stand with the others, a grin on his slightly scarred face. Ratchet frowned at the white wrecker. Didn't you come here to be patched up? You can't go fighting in that condition. Wheeljack shrugged, his smile clearly saying don't be ridiculous, Doc, like that could keep me from fighting. Come on, Doc, you already did your job, and it's not like those little scratches would slow me down. I barely started fixing you. That doesn't mean I'm anywhere near ready. The wrecker scoffed, but his without a doubt snarky response was never heard as Prime intervened. Wheeljack, it would be better for you to stay at the base, Optimus stated, fixing the ruffian with a neutral but stern gaze. There is no need to take unnecessary risks. For a moment Ratchet thought Wheeljack was going to object, but in the end he just rolled his eyes as if the matter didn't really even interest him. Whatever you say, boss. As Ratchet opened the ground bridge and watched half of Team Prime walk through it, he almost wished Optimus had taken Wheeljack with them so the medic wouldn't have to deal with fight-deprived annoyed wrecker. The white bot sighed and shut the bridge, watching the green light die out. While he continued to patch the other bot up, Ratchet wondered if all the wreckers had been as immature and reckless as Bulkhead and especially Wheeljack. He wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. So, the wrecker drawled, clearly still annoyed about being left behind but at least attempting to start some conversation. Strange ones, those little guests of yours. They sure are, Ratchet replied, frowning at the wound he was healing at the moment. Not something I would have ever thought would happen. Yeah. I mean, ninjas from other dimensions? I would have thought it a great joke if I hadn't met the little guys myself. So you like Naruto then? Ratchet asked, smiling amusedly. He's like another version of Miko, only even louder. If that's even possible, Wheeljack let out a rumbling laugh. So the kids got spirit. There was a small silence between them and Ratchet moved to fix the next, fortunately smaller wound. What do you think about them, then? Ratchet met the wrecker's eyes briefly, slightly surprised at the other's enthusiasm in talking with him. Well, he began, squinting his optics at the nasty scratch on Wheeljack's arm. They sure are interesting. though they are not telling awfully lot about themselves. Optimus says they'll speak up when they realize we're not going to double-cross them or something. Yeah. Wonder what they are hiding, though. Another silence descended upon them, and Ratchet continued to quickly and efficiently patch up the wounds. Suddenly another beep from the computers disturbed the peace of the unusually quiet base. What now? The white and red medic grumbled, walking back to the screens, Wheeljack at his heels. It took only a moment for Ratchet to find out what was going on. He narrowed his optics at the map appearing on the screens. What is it, Doc? There has been some activity in one of the abandoned Decepticon energon mines that we are keeping an eye on, Ratchet explained. It's supposed to be stripped clean, so there's no reason for anyone to wander around there. Apparently that's not the case, Wheeljack noted. Someone should check it out. Ratchet nodded. They couldn't afford to overlook anything that could possibly cost them any energon resources. So, Wheeljack said impatiently, nodding towards the computers. Just open the bridge and I'll take care of it. TSK. Did you not hear me earlier? You're in no condition to fight. You already finished with the serious ones, the wrecker pointed out. The rest are barely scratches. And you know someone must go, and you'll have to stay to operate the bridge. So, unless you have any other ideas, just get it over with. Ratchet frowned deeply but couldn't fault the other bot's logic, no matter how much he wanted to. He nodded grimly and set the coordinates for the portal. In no time he was hitting the switch, and the green glow once again lighted up the room. Just don't get yourself killed. All my hard work would be for naught. Thanks for the help, Doc, Wheeljack said, ignoring his warning and walking towards the ground bridge. I'll be back in no time. He watched as the swirling green portal appeared to the room. He made sure he would remain unseen in his hiding spot as Wheeljack walked to the ground bridge. This was his chance. The base was almost empty, and the only remaining Autobot would be Ratchet. The medic turned his back to the portal when Wheeljack disappeared into it. Now, he dashed soundlessly towards the portal, boosting his speed with chakra so he could reach the gate to his freedom before the medic would shut it down. Almost there, he ran into the green glow just when Ratchet hit the switch again. When the ground bridge had faded from existence, there was no sign of the ninja in the room anymore. Wheeljack stepped out from the portal and into the gloomy woods. The afternoon sky was covered with thick dark gray clouds, and the gentle breeze of wind brought the smell of rain with it. The forest was silent. A little too silent, in fact. He had been looking forward to a decent fight, not a Sunday stroll. Though it could always be just that famous calm before the storm. The glow died down behind him, leaving him in the gloom. The wrecker let a lopsided grin spread on his face. It was nice to help Team Prime again, and he was glad he could do it on his own this time. It was time to get ready for some serious con-cutting. Whoa! Where are we? You got to be kidding me. What do you think you're doing, kid? The wrecker asked in a very unamused tone, turning around to face Uzumaki Naruto, who stood some steps behind him. The blonde boy was looking around curiously, turning his head like an owl as he tried to see everything at once. It's just a forest. What is there to see anyway? Getting some air, of course, the boy declared, meeting the Autobot's gaze with a stubborn glare. Do you know how long I've been stuck in that place? It was about time I got out a little, and you decided to do it now? Just because this place is quiet now doesn't mean it couldn't soon be crawling with cons. And that was apparently the wrong thing to say. Cool, came the excited reply. I was looking forward to a rematch. Wheeljack snorted. A rematch? Come on, you're just I'm not a kid. Naruto countered, voice fierce and blue eyes blazing. I've been a ninja for 3 years. I can take care of myself. Wheeljack narrowed his eyes, taking a step towards the little annoyance. You might be a good fighter back home, kid, but that doesn't mean that same rules apply here. You've seen, one con and you think that's enough. Wheeljack let out a bark of laughter. You wouldn't stand a chance. Naruto seemed to be less than happy about the wrecker's attitude. Then there was a foxy grin spreading on his face. So, what I need is to see more action. If I can follow you around and watch you fight, the next time I see bad guys I'll be able to beat them. The blonde boy smiled smugly at him, clearly proud of his reasoning. Wheeljack sighed mentally. Why couldn't this heist have been just a simple beat out the cons job? He hadn't signed up for babysitting or arguing with human teenagers. Why did the kids always tag along? He felt kind of bad for Bulkhead for a moment. His friend had to deal with the little pests even more. Okay, maybe a pest was too harsh a word. They were cool kids after all, and on top of all they were running out of time. The con Ratchet had spotted wouldn't loiter around and could be gone at any second while he spent his precious time by bickering with a child. If his old team from the war had seen him now, they would have laughed until their voice boxes stopped working. or until he had beaten the spark out of them. But if the kid would stay out of trouble. Yeah, right, it could be good for him to see some real example of taking out a con. And on top of that, the White Wrecker couldn't help but feel sympathetic for the young man who had been forced to stay inside four walls the whole time. Wheeljack knew he would get mad after just a few days, or hours, of imprisonment. Fine then, he said, and Naruto let out a victorious yes. You can tag along but stay out of sight, got that, kid? I didn't come here to babysit you. Yes, sir. The blonde saluted him with a huge smile on his face. Wheeljack thought this might be a very bad idea. But there was no more time to waste, and if the kid really was a ninja then he should be fine, right? He really hoped he would be alright. Otherwise there would probably be a very angry gray-haired ninja back in the base, and he would like to keep his optics functioning. Thank you very much. Let's get going then, the wrecker said, turning and starting towards the direction he had been about to head before the interruption. When he glanced behind him, Naruto had disappeared from view. At least he does as I say. For now. Wheeljack mentally shook his head. It was time to concentrate to the mission at hand. The mine wasn't far and neither was the Decepticon. He flexed his fingers, ready to grab the swords at the moment he saw a trace of the enemy. There was a clearing ahead, and the wrecker strode to the edge of the woods and halted there. A large cliff loomed in front of him on the other side of the clearing. His optics locked on a large crack on the rock. The cave entrance, he thought. There was nothing out of ordinary in sight, and the forest was as quiet as the space itself. Just when he was about to start towards the mine entrance, there was a distant sound of footsteps echoing from the cave, and the outlines of a slim figure walking towards the woods appeared to the sight. Wheeljack changed his posture into a fighting stance as his mask slid into its place. He buried the urge to glance behind him. He would just have to trust that his new sidekick was smart enough to really stay hidden. And then a blue and black Decepticon strode from the darkness into the gloomy afternoon. Wheeljack's optics narrowed. So it was you, he said. Guess there's no point in asking what you were doing in an empty energon mine then, eh? Soundwave had stopped in front of the entrance, staring at the wrecker. Or at least he looked like he was staring at him. It was always hard to tell with the creepy communications chief. Oh, this was going to be interesting. Well, Wheeljack said, his lips twisting into a grim smile. I think this is what they call a rematch then, eh? The blue optics narrowed dangerously. Wonder how you'll do now, without any nice little relics in your back pocket to save the day. Soundwave just tilted his head. Got nothing to say? A cricket chirped in the distance. There was a silent swoosh as two swords were unsheathed. The visored head remained unmoving. The wrecker grinned. Then let us begin. He darted forwards, leaping into the air and bringing the swords down at the Decepticon. Soundwave dodged the attack at the last second, backing away. Wheeljack's swords hit the ground and the wrecker grunted, spinning around and slashing the katanas at the dark-colored con. Soundwave swiftly evaded, stepping to side and bringing one arm to block the next swing of a sword. The wrecker growled, advancing nonetheless and stabbing the other sword at the communications chief's midsection. Soundwave dodged, and the next thing Wheeljack knew was one of the silent con's tentacles rushing towards him. The wrecker hit it aside, determined to keep the blasted things away from him. This was not going to be a repetition of their last encounter. The fight continued and the two robots moved around the clearing, slashing and kicking and evading and blocking. It had started to rain, big lazy drops falling from the skies. The water was running down the communications chief's visor and dripping from the two unsheathed swords as Wheeljack once again dashed forwards, aiming a deadly strike at the con's head. Soundwave tilted his helm away and the blade only slightly grazed the side of his head. Then, for a moment, the blue and black Decepticon looked like he was looking at something over the wrecker's shoulder. Wheeljack grinned behind his mask, racing towards his opponent in a vicious lunge. But apparently Soundwave's attention was back on him, if it had ever wavered, and the con deflected the strikes, but couldn't block the powerful kick the white bot aimed at his chest. The dark robot flew backwards to the ground but stood up almost immediately, way too graciously for someone who had just been kicked. Wheeljack pressed on relentlessly and the fight continued, the only sounds aside the rain being the loud clangs of metal hitting metal. The wrecker was forced backwards as the violet-veined tentacle shot towards him. He hit it aside but couldn't quite dodge the next one that managed to grab him by the shoulder and hurl him to the other side of the clearing. Scrap, the wrecker thought while picking himself off of the ground, glancing furiously at the advancing con. As another one of the tentacles came down towards him, he swatted it away with a swing of his sword, then aiming another strike at Soundwave. The blade made a long scratch across the other mech's chest and Soundwave staggered back, fingers grazing the gash. Wheeljack raced forwards triumphantly, ready to plunge the other sword to the con's chest and finally end this. There was a sound of approaching flyers, clearly audible over the rain. Wheeljack's optics widened a bit. Reinforcements? A clang echoed in the clearing as Soundwave once again blocked the strike with one arm. Wheeljack snorted. So you're calling back up then? Couldn't handle me on your own? Soundwave just tilted his visored head, and Wheeljack had the creepiest of feelings that the other mech was smiling at him. He suddenly remembered when he thought that Soundwave had seen something behind him. The wrecker kicked the other robot away and swiftly retreated a bit, shouting over his shoulder, "Naruto, run!" There was a roar of jet engines loud enough to make the white bot feel like his audio receptors had been split apart as 5 flyers raced over them, right towards the woods where Naruto was apparently hiding. Wheeljack started to run after them, but then he felt something grab his doorwing from behind and one of the tentacles threw him to the opposite direction. He landed heavily to the wet ground. The wrecker raised his gaze as he stood up, optics blazing with silent fury and locking onto the dark Khan standing between him and the woods. "You know you can't keep me here long enough, Khan," he spat, tightening his grip on the swords. Another rumble of turbines split the air and someone landed behind him. "But the two of us will certainly be more than enough, wrecker." Wheeljack spun around to face Dreadwing, who was just straightening and watching him with cold look in his red eyes. Scrap. Double scrap. Wheeljack hardly had time to evade Soundwave's tentacles reaching him. The air was filled with the roar of Dreadwing's machine gun. How had everything went downhill so fast? "Hey Doc!" Wheeljack shouted through the comlink. "I really wouldn't mind some backup now." The medic's urgent voice came through the link. "What is it, Wheeljack?" "Soundwave, Dreadwing and a bunch of flyers if you must know. Just send someone here. The kid might need help." "And me too, but I'm not going to say it aloud," he thought while lunging at Dreadwing, swords cleaving the air and rain. "The kid?" Ratchet's voice was confused before the realization dawned at him. "Is Naruto there? What in the name of Primus were you thinking?" "Now's not the time for pointing fingers, Doc. I'll call for reinforcements." Ratchet's voice was tight, and Wheeljack was glad the medic didn't waste more time bickering. "Just hold on, Wheeljack." "Sure thing, document." Though that might be easier said than done, the wrecker thought grimly as he adjusted his grip on the blades, ready to face the 2 advancing Decepticons. RC was walking through the empty corridors of the missile silo. Nothing unusual had happened during scouting. The deserts had been desolate, and with no signs of enemy activity, so she had ended up just driving around the silent roads. After a long drive around the base, she had returned to the silo only to find it almost as empty as the deserted roads. Ratchet, once again absorbed by his work, had been hunched over the computers, curtly explaining that the others had left for missions. Nothing crucial, apparently, as there had been no contacts through comlink from either party. RC had left him with his work and headed to check their interdimensional visitors. Her opinion about the 2 ninjas had hardly changed over the week. She still thought nothing good could come from keeping 2 strangers who had told almost nothing about themselves in their only sanctuary against the Decepticons. But Optimus Prime was still sure they would eventually open up. RC scowled. She had kept her opinions to herself after the first few days, but she couldn't bury the feeling of uneasiness whenever the ninjas were in the same room. The blue femme sighed. Maybe she was paranoid. But she didn't want to take any chances either. She reached the room in which their guests were camping in, and found no other than Hitaki Kakashi strolling through the open door. "Afternoon, RC-san," the gray-haired man said, smiling that infuriating eye smile of his. "Afternoon." RC didn't smile but tried to avoid looking too suspicious or annoyed. She glanced at the shutting door and asked, "Reading with that student of yours again?" "Oh no, Naruto left a while ago. That boy can't concentrate on things like that for too long," Hitaki replied smoothly. Funny, RC thought. Didn't see him with Ratchet either. She was just about to voice her thoughts as Kakashi spoke again. "Came to check we are not tearing down the base, RC-san?" The ninja's voice was just a little too amused. RC arched an eyebrow. "Is there a reason to?" The blue bot had a feeling the man in front of her was smiling again, but he couldn't be sure with the mask and all. "I think we promised we were not going to cause any trouble, and I think I said I don't trust you." Kakashi rolled his lone eye, but before he could answer, RC turned slightly away from him, bringing one hand up to receive the message through comlink. "Yes, RC?" Ratchet's voice was urgent. "Get here right now and bring Kakashi with you." "What is it?" She saw the ninja frown as he tried to deduce what was being said on the other end of the conversation. "Wheeljack's in trouble." A short pause. "And Naruto too." RC's blue optics widened a bit, and she glanced at the man beside her. There were dozens of questions swirling in her mind, but she pushed them aside. Instead she replied, "We'll be there." She let her hand drop as she turned to face the ninja, a serious look on her face. "Let's get going. Your student is in trouble." Naruto was running. He dashed through the woods, jumping over fallen trees and puddles and avoiding moss-covered stones. There was a sizzling sound behind him, and the ground below his feet exploded. He jumped away, rolling on the forest floor and quickly scrambling up. This was not how his first fight with the Decepticons should have gone. He had stayed hidden just like Wheeljack had told him to, sneaking in the bushes and behind the trees but still closely following the fight happening in the clearing. And what a fight that had been! A death match between two gigantic robots certainly was among the coolest things he had ever seen and would probably reach to the top of the list. And he had been closely observing how the particular blue and black robot had fought. Kakashi-sensei would be proud of him. After his teacher was done scolding him for leaving the base, of course. He had been almost sure he had stayed away from sight, but apparently that had not been the case, as suddenly there had been a bunch of flying, without a doubt Decepticons heading right at him, shooting red beams of light towards him, and that's when he had decided it would be better to retreat a bit. He avoided another beam of deadly light, continuing to run. But running wouldn't save him in the end. He needed to fight back. He stopped dead on his tracks as one of the enemies landed right in front of him, transforming into a black and violet robot with wing parts draped behind its back. It turned its visored helm down at him and aimed a triangle-shaped weapon straight at him. Oh, he thought, and quickly leaped behind a large rock as the red, burning beams of light shot past him. Now, he thought determinedly, hands flying through familiar seals. It's show time, Kagebunshin no Jutsu. He shouted and a bunch of clones appeared around him. Okay, let's go guys. He cried and darted behind his cover, the doppelgangers right behind him. There would be no use using kicks and punches against this foe. The freaking thing was made of metal, and Naruto was smart enough to realize that he would just end up breaking his hands, even with chakra-enhanced attacks. The Decepticon took a few steps back when the group of clones and one original ninja rushed forwards. The beams of light, nearly as tall as he, shot through the rain, hitting two of the clones which disappeared in puffs of white smoke. That's not fair, Naruto thought while running towards the con, trying to get behind it as the clones distracted the robot. However, the amount of Kagebunshins was quickly decreasing as the robot mercilessly shot them down. Now, Naruto thought, and couldn't help but grin when starting to form the next jutsu with one of his remaining clones. Rasengan! He shouted, the ball of swirling energy in his hand as he dashed towards the tall robot that was just about to turn to face him as the last of the other clones dispersed in white smoke. Too late! Naruto thought, and slammed the Rasengan to the robot's side. There was a screeching sound of crumbling metal as the Decepticon's side exploded in sparks and bits of scrap. The con staggered back and fell to the ground, trying desperately to get back up despite the grave injuries. Ha! Take that! Naruto shouted, triumphantly punching the air. But there was no break for him as there was another blaze of red light shooting past him and hitting a nearby tree with a loud crash. Oh, come on! Naruto grumbled, evading the next shots. Another Decepticon, looking just like the first one, had landed, running towards him and firing all the time with the triangular gun. While dodging the rapidly fired shots, he formed another set of all too familiar hand signs. 6 more clones poofed to existence beside him. Okay, let's try the same tactic. Naruto shouted at his Kagebunshins, circling behind another large rock and racing back towards the robot. One of his clones was already hit and met its demise in a cloud of smoke. They were dropping like flies. He should try to end this as quickly as possible. He dodged another beam of red by hair's breadth, and jumped away from the splinters of wood when another shot hit a tree behind him. There was a roar of turbines and another flight mode con rushed over him, firing its own set of red beams that again reduced the number of the teen's shadow clones. Whoa, Naruto thought, his mouth now a grim line. This is harder than I thought. Though I am quite badly outnumbered. He really hoped Kakashi-sensei would be here to aid him. But for now he was alone and that would have to do. He was about to dash past the Decepticon when the robot suddenly, instead of attempting to shoot him, slammed its fist down at him. He jumped away, rolling on the ground and scrambling up into a crouch. One of his clones jumped and kicked the con in the head. The attack had no real effect, but it was a welcome distraction as the Decepticon turned to get rid of the clone. The blonde was up again and forming another Rasengan with the help of one of the shadow clones. Then he was running towards his foe, jumping on a rock and aiming the Rasengan-filled palm to the back of the neck of the con, who was busy getting rid of the remaining clones. There was another sound of exploding metal and the Decepticon dropped to the ground, unmoving. One more down! Naruto grinned, landing in a crouch over the fallen enemy and straightening. He had no time to dodge as one more Decepticon was suddenly flying towards him. The red bolt of light hit the ground right at his feet, and he was thrown backwards by the blast, landing roughly on the forest floor wet from the rain. Ow, 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 he groaned, rolling onto his back. His body felt battered but fortunately not broken, though he probably had some quite colorful bruises forming. He was just about to drag himself up again when the third Decepticon landed practically on him. He let out a shout of surprise and fright but had no time to evade when the robot brought one of its claw-like hands down, piercing his right forearm and pinning it to the ground, making him cry in pain. Damn, damn, damn! He thought frantically. The thing knew how he used his jutsus and was quite efficiently preventing him from using any techniques. This is bad. The red-visored head turned to stare at him eerily as the Khan crouched above him. Naruto swallowed. Not good. Not good at all. Chapter 9. Kakashi rushed from the corridor, RC at his heels just when Ratchet's voice echoed around the bridge room. Understood. Ratchet out. Kakashi stopped behind the medic and the white robot turned around, his face grim. I have contacted Optimus and others, he said. The beacon was a hoax. They were ambushed by a horde of Insecticons, RC cursed under her breath. Kakashi just raised his eyebrow. He obviously had no idea what an Insecticon was, but it didn't sound too good. Can you bridge them out? RC asked, moving to stand beside Kakashi. Ratchet shook his head. According to Optimus, there's too many of them now. Opening a ground bridge is too risky. We will have to wait. So, I'm going to send you to Wheeljack and Naruto. Kakashi nodded, his mouth a grim line under his mask. He should have known something like this would happen. Naruto wasn't a kid anymore, but he craved for action and cabin fever really wasn't good for the young ninja. Being holed up underground made him do some bad and rash decisions. What's the situation there then? RC asked, flexing her fingers. Soundwave, Dreadwing, and an unknown amount of flyers. Scrap, RC cursed. She glanced at Kakashi. Dreadwing is Megatron's first lieutenant. Soundwave is the chief of communications. And they were apparently tailed by a group of minions. Kakashi nodded curtly. He tried to imagine the foes he would be up against. He had almost no idea what to expect, and he did not like it one bit. So, what are we waiting for? The ninja asked. If he was going to fight against some giant robots, he might as well start right away. He didn't like not having enough information prior a battle. Back home, he had had loads of experience, knowledge of thousands of jutsus, and now he was about to march into a combat situation with powerful enemies that didn't fight by the former rules. But then again, from the Decepticons' perspective, either did he. Ratchet had a serious look in his blue eyes. I'll open a bridge for you. While the medic turned to activate the portal, RC straightened momentarily, then transformed into the blue motorcycle. Kakashi felt like he could never get used to watching that happen. Hop on, RC, the motorcycle said. How could she even talk when in that form? If the situation had been any less severe, Kakashi would probably have considered it a little longer, as riding such vehicles was something he had never done before. But now wasn't the time for hesitation. He remembered how Jack had always easily climbed to sit on the motorbike, and imitated the civilian kid as best as he could, carefully yet swiftly getting on the vehicle. His gloved fingers gripped the handles tightly. The posture he had adopted truly felt weird. A fleeting thought of Obito would have loved this entered his mind, leaving as fast as it had appeared, because suddenly there was a green vortex in front of them and RC's engines roared like thunder as the motorcycle shot forwards and through the portal. Kakashi instantly flattened himself as low as possible against the rushing wind. Of course he had traveled fast before. Ninjas could move quite quickly with chakra, but this was somehow different, more loud and extreme, and this time he wasn't the one making the movement and setting the pace. And suddenly they were not in the base anymore, but in dark woods with rain clouds hanging heavy on the sky. RC raced forwards for a moment, heading forwards where Wheeljack's signal had apparently been before braking and stopping as the terrain got rougher. Kakashi slid off, his knees a little shaky. The Autobot transformed back into her robot form, crouching beside him, one arm changing into a weapon of some sort, ready to be fired. As Kakashi straightened and tried to recover from the short yet affecting race, he started to hear voices over the sound of rain, explosions, cracks of breaking wood, distant shouts. There, RC said, her voice clipped, and pointed where red beams of light could be seen, not too far from them. Kakashi saw a tall form of a robot, a Decepticon, as it most definitely wasn't Wheeljack, running through the woods and firing at something. I'll get Naruto, you help Wheeljack, Kakashi said. RC just nodded. Be careful, they are flyers. Her eyes flashed. As the name indicates, they do fly. Thanks for the warning, Kakashi said with a grim smile that was quickly mirrored by RC. Then the blue bot rushed forwards, her footsteps getting fainter and fainter under the roar of the pouring rain. Let's get going then, he muttered and set off. The forest was very different to what they had back in Konoha. The trees were smaller and grew thicker, and it just felt different, smelled different. The sounds of battle grew louder, and the beams of light brighter. There was a loud metallic crash from ahead and Kakashi increased his speed. He had to reach Naruto before. There was a roar of engines and something flying sped above him. Kakashi cursed and ducked instinctively. The Decepticons circled back and raced towards him, transforming while still on air and dropping heavily in front of him. The flyer straightened and looked down at Kakashi with expressionless visor. Kakashi darted behind large rocks, narrowly evading red beams of light, making the tree trunks behind him crack and explode. Well, that's new, he thought somberly while running, attempting to circle around the con. The rain fell down like a proper downpour, making forest floor muddy and slippery under his sandals. Kunais would be useless against his metallic foe. He had gathered that much from the first encounter in the desert. He would have to choose his techniques carefully, as it would be the best to try to end the fight as soon as possible. The Khan only had to get one single hit, and that'd be it. Suddenly he smirked. He started to rummage through his vest while ducking behind a big tree. His gloved fingers soon found what they were looking for, and he drew out an explosive tag from his pocket. He heard the flyer approaching. He steeled himself, taking a deep breath, and then darted from behind his cover, dodging the blasts from the triangular weapon and dashed straight towards the Decepticon. He leaped and rolled, slamming the tag into what would have been, had it been human, the Khan's upper tight. The flyer started to turn, without a doubt aiming at his back again as he ran away from it. There was a loud explosion from behind him, and the metal cried and complained with a nasty screeching sound. He glanced back to see the flyer collapse to the ground, bits of metal lying everywhere. His lips twisted into a small smile. Then there was another sound of exploding metal, coming from the opposite direction RC had headed to. Naruto. He continued running, jumping over a fallen tree and a couple of rocks. The sounds of battle were growing stronger. He hastily tugged up the Hittite and opened the Sharingan, and the world became into a different kind of focus. There was another flyer ahead, already targeting him with its blaster and firing rapidly. The Sharingan whirled wildly in its socket as he evaded shot after shot, hands once more forming the very familiar seals. Raikiri. The surrounding gloomy woods were momentarily lit up by a white-blue light that surrounded his hand as he dodged the flyer's final attempt to take him out by slamming its fist down at him. He struck out his fist and rammed it into the Decepticon's torso. The metal was forced to give way to the brute strength of his chakra-filled hand, and the middle of the flyer's torso soon had a smoking hole in it. The Jounin just managed to draw his hand out and jump back as the robot fell on its back to the ground. Well, that's something I haven't done before, he muttered. He grimaced as he felt himself getting fatigued already. He still hadn't fully recovered and couldn't waste too much chakra anymore. But he had no time to loiter around. He still had a student to find. That's when he heard the shout of agony echo around the woods. He was already moving, once again racing through the forest and towards the voice. The Sharingan continued to swirl as he ran forwards, his speed enhanced with chakra as the trees seemed to nearly blur around him. Then he saw it. The remaining flyer standing over Naruto, who was currently lying on the forest floor, trying to break out from the Khan's hold. He circled behind the enemy and approached, silent and deadly as the elite ninja he was. Another lighting blade was formed into his fist as he stormed towards the one remaining foe. The flyer turned its head to face him just when he was about to strike. The bluish light reflected from the blank visor. Then Kakashi slammed his fist into the Khan's face. Another explosion and sound of metal screeching. Another body of a Decepticon started to drop to the ground. He saw Naruto rolling away from the robotic corpse that hit the ground with a loud thud. Kakashi landed into a crouch a little away from Naruto and the now offline flyer. Or he at least attempted to, because as soon as his feet hit the ground his knees gave out, and he fell to the wet ground. Maybe that last Raikiri was a little too much, then, though before his eyes rolled back in his head and he slipped into the darkness. RC ran towards the battle, thinking if leaving Kakashi on his own had been the right choice or not. He was a human after all, small and fragile, and about to dive into a battle with an enemy he had no experience fighting before. He didn't even have any modern weapons, no guns to fight the Khans with. She then berated herself angrily. Hadn't she been saying all week that there was something the ninjas weren't telling the Autobots? Hadn't she been suspecting some weird powers all that time their dimensional tourists had spent at the base? Well, now they could as well use them. RC smiled darkly as she dashed forwards. He hoped Kakashi would find Naruto before the kid got himself killed. She herself had a trouble-attracting record to find. The sounds of the battle grew stronger, and she managed to catch a glimpse of white metal between the trees. Then she emerged from the forest into a clearing filled with signs of battle. And that was where she found Wheeljack, fighting against both Dreadwing and Soundwave. The wrecker was missing one of his swords already and was at the moment firing rapidly with his blaster, and forcing Dreadwing to back off while simultaneously keeping off Soundwave's tentacles with the remaining blade. He was fighting like a true wrecker, he was. But it didn't change the fact that he was outnumbered and beginning to look increasingly weary. RC sped up, dashing towards the Decepticon communications chief who had just managed to block the wrecker's sword while he was getting more and more preoccupied by Dreadwing, who was approaching despite the rain of blue bolts of laser fired at the first lieutenant's direction. RC jumped. Soundwave turned his head at her, but it was already too late. RC's heel kicked viciously at the Khan's chest, and Soundwave was thrown backwards. RC landed on a crouch beside Wheeljack, who dodged a strike from Dreadwing and threw a punch at the large Decepticon's head, making him too stagger backwards. "Nice you decided to join the party, RC," the white wrecker said, grinning like a maniac. RC snorted. "Only 2 against 1? You getting rusty, Wheeljack?" The loose cannon of the Autobots barked a laugh. "Me? Never." Then his tone turned a little more serious. "The others?" RC narrowed her eyes as Soundwave picked himself off the ground and turned his empty visor to stare at them. "Not yet. Ratchet will send them as soon as possible. Kakashi went to find Naruto." Wheeljack let out an affirmative grunt and flexed his fingers to get a better hold of the sword. RC could hear Dreadwing approaching. "Then it's just you and me, eh?" Wheeljack said as RC leaped into action and darted towards Soundwave. For a moment the only sounds in the clearing were the harsh clashes of metal against metal and an occasional blast of a laser. The rain had subsided into a light drizzle, but the stormy-looking clouds continued to hover above them. RC evaded one of Soundwave's violet-tinted tentacles that tried to grab a hold of her arm. She batted the other one aside too, bringing up her blaster and firing at the Khan's head. Soundwave dodged but couldn't avoid the next punch delivered at the side of his face. With a cry, RC rushed forwards, only to feel one of the tentacles attach itself on her back. Soundwave tilted his head and threw her backwards like a piece of junk metal. She crashed violently into the muddy ground. Groaning, she opened her eyes and saw the tentacles approaching her again, only to be pulled back as Wheeljack, who had now lost his remaining sword too, fired at the sleek-visored Decepticon. RC grunted and pulled herself up into a crouch. Swiftly she aimed her blaster at Dreadwing, firing with an annoyed snarl and distracting him enough so his punch aimed at the back of Wheeljack's head missed its target. Then she was back on her feet, her focus once again back on Soundwave. Scrap, she thought as she was once again in a vicious hand-to-hand combat with the communications chief. Where were the others? They couldn't keep this up forever. Suddenly there was a thunderous roar and 3 flyers sped over them. "Scrap!" RC shouted, kicking Soundwave in the chest and retreating a bit. She was once again back-to-back with Wheeljack, who seemed to have as rough a time as she was. "We have to wrap this up now. I have a feeling I know where the flyers are heading to." Wheeljack grunted and RC felt the wrecker tapping her arm. Soon her fingers were tightly wrapped around a grenade. 13 seconds, see, he said, and engaged into a new fight with Dreadwing. RC smiled grimly and sped towards Soundwave. A tentacle dived at her from the side, but she jumped over it, struck another one aside and moved to throw a punch at Soundwave's head. The Khan dodged. He didn't, however, have the time to evade the roundhouse kick the Femme slammed at the side of his face. The Decepticon staggered backwards and dropped to one knee, one sleek arm rising to wipe the mud of the visor, and RC had already thrown the grenade at his feet. She had barely time to transform and rush away from the blast. The motorcycle came to a halt at the edge of the clearing and she transformed back, crouching and looking at the scene of the explosion with narrowed optics. No sign of Soundwave. "RC!" At the sound of Wheeljack's voice she snapped her gaze at Dreadwing, who was currently getting punched in the face by the wrecker, blue energon dripping down his chin. She stood up and soon the 2 Autobots were fighting the remaining enemy, kicking and striking and forcing him to retreat towards the forest. Wheeljack kicked him in the knee and Dreadwing staggered back with a grunt. After managing to dodge RC's kick by a wire's breadth, the Decepticon seemed to decide it would be best to retreat completely. Wheeljack tried to grab him by the wing as he transformed, but it was already too late, and he and RC looked as the Nemesis second-in-command sped off into the gray sky and away from the battle. RC let out a huff and Wheeljack laughed, swiping off a trickle of leaking energon from the corner of his mouth. The white wrecker had acquired a great deal of new scrapes and cuts all over his paint job and even a couple of rather nasty-looking dents at his torso. She herself probably wasn't doing much better. Oh, she could already hear Ratchet's outraged huffs and scolding words. Before either of them had time to say anything, there was an animalistic roar of fury emanating from the forest. They both whirled around. "What on Cybertron was that?" Wheeljack cried out. RC stared at the dark woods. For a moment the forest was silent. Then there was an explosion loud enough to split audio receptors, and a couple of trees seemed to fall down in the distance. RC and Wheeljack shared a look. "Ratchet," RC said through the comlink as Wheeljack went to fetch his swords. "Now would be a really good time for those reinforcements." As soon as Naruto saw the familiar bluish lighting crackling in the air behind the huge robot about to blast his head off, he got ready to move. The second the Decepticon turned slightly, absently releasing his slashed arm, he rolled away, grunting in pain but determined to get as far as possible. It would be a very stupid way to die, by being crushed by a giant robot falling on top of you. There was a loud crash of exploding metal and their enemy dropped to the ground. Smoking bits and pieces fell everywhere. For a moment Naruto just lay there, catching his breath and enjoying the heartbeat beneath his ribs. Alive. Still alive. He groaned in pain as he dragged himself up into a sitting position. Where was Kakashi-sensei? Was he all right? "Sensei," Naruto forced himself to his feet and staggered to the fallen form of his teacher. The blonde boy grimaced and cradled his wounded arm with the other. Damn con. He could barely move his arm and it was bleeding sluggishly, staining his clothes and dripping to the ground. He dropped onto his knees on the wet ground and tried to wake his teacher. "Sensei? Kakashi-sensei, can you hear me?" He managed to turn the Hatake on his back with his healthy arm. Kakashi-sensei's eyes were both closed and he was breathing, though a little shallowly, and the jounin seemed to be even paler than usual, the only splashes of color on his face being the stains of mud. He shook his teacher's shoulder slightly, then with a little more force. The silver-haired man didn't even stir. Naruto cursed mentally. His sensei had overdone it again, and drained all of his only partially recovered chakra reserves. "Come on, sensei, this is a very bad time to take a nap." He tried slightly tapping the copy-nin's masked cheek. But Kakashi-sensei was definitely out cold, and wouldn't be waking for a while. A roar of rapidly nearing engines split the air in the not-so-far distance. This was bad. Very bad. This was hideous, in fact. He could not manage any seals, not while his other arm was practically useless. Otherwise he could have easily made a couple of shadow clones and send them to get his teacher to safety. But now he could only do his best to drag Kakashi-sensei into a slightly more comfortable position where he wasn't lying directly in a puddle of rainwater. He sat there beside his teacher, holding his bad arm close to his side. Where was Wheeljack? If he had gotten rid of the sleek blue-black con, he would already be here, wouldn't he? And Kakashi-sensei hadn't hopefully come here alone. The Autobots would soon be here and his sensei would get to safety. A flyer dived from the sky, transforming and dropping into a slight crouch into the wet ground. Naruto bolted up, stifling a groan of pain. The flyer wasn't alone. Soon there were two others slightly behind him, all watching them with empty visors and the drizzling rain here and there streaming down the dark metallic surface. They aimed their triangle-shaped weapons straight at them. Naruto placed himself between the Decepticons and unconscious Kakashi-sensei. "You won't get him, you flying pieces of scrap metal," he threatened, because really, what else he could do? Throwing knives would be useless, and he cursed himself for not having any explosion tags with him. He should have checked Sensei's vest for them. Now he didn't have the time for such things anymore. The con closest to him slowly tilted his head and took one step forwards. Naruto let his body slip into a fighting stance. His arm throbbed viciously. "Not a step closer," he growled. He could not lose now, he could not. This wasn't just about him. Kakashi-sensei needed him. He wouldn't let the copy-nin meet his demise while lying passed out on the forest floor because of having to help Naruto out of trouble. This was all his fault. He couldn't do any seals. He couldn't fight them. He couldn't run. His eyes flashed red. The flyer stepped closer. There was a fist, cloaked in a red bubbling aura, hitting the Decepticon in the lower torso with a shattering force. The robot was flown backwards, its metal back hitting a tree that cracked loudly and started to fall from the brute force. The flyer dropped to the ground, trying to drag itself up again. The two others glanced at their comrade, and then back to the ninja in apparent confusion and shock. Naruto dropped into a crouch to the forest floor from the leap he had made. The blonde boy breathed raggedly, his shoulders hunched and one arm dangling uselessly at his side. But at the moment he was blind to the pain, blind to the odds, and blind to anything that wasn't his enemies standing right in front of him. A second tail joined the blur of red around him, the aura's edges sharpening and making him appear very beast-like. He raised his head and met the visored gazes with red eyes full of rage. At that moment, Naruto was gone. The QB roared. Through the haze of rage and animalistic fury he saw the flyer on the left quickly raise its weapon again, aiming at him. The QB leaped forwards, face twisted in an ugly snarl as he plunged his now clawed fist into the Khan's side. The beast didn't care about the stabbing pain in his wounded arm that would have been debilitating if his eyes would still be blue and if Naruto would still be in charge of his body. Now it barely slowed the demon fox down at all. The Kyuubi drew back his arm from the strike and slammed his fist forward again, hitting the Khan in the torso before it could aim the gun at his head. The metal creaked, complained, and gave way to the fist filled with demonic chakra. The flyer flew backwards and went down with a thunderous crash. There was a blaze of red light behind him, and he barely managed to evade the laser beams hitting trees and ground behind him. He growled and leaped at the side, avoiding more shots of the triangular blaster the third enemy kept aimed at him. He suddenly dashed forwards, hitting the ground in front of the flyer. It staggered back from the flying earth and rocks and tried desperately to land even one hit at the monster raging in front of it, throwing a punch at his head. The Kyuubi just snarled again, ducking under the strike, and rammed his fisted hand at the Khan's leg. The flyer was forced to stagger backwards and it fell heavily to the ground as its leg could no longer support its weight. The Kyuubi stormed forwards, leaped, and brought down the fist filled with red flaming chakra straight at the Decepticon's chest. The metallic body jerked violently and went completely still. As he stood there, hunched again and snarling at the world, the furious aura surrounding him spiked and grew, another tail finding its way out. The remaining enemy, the one that had finally picked itself up from the muddy ground, let its blaster sing and fired a shot after a shot after a shot at him. He roared in pain and rage as the tree trunk behind him exploded, sending sharp pieces of wood flying, a couple of them hitting his back. He leaped forwards, not minding the damage he was doing to his already battered arm as he dashed forwards, batting the aimed gun away with a sound of metal breaking and creaking under the force. He jumped, the demon chakra giving him lots of extra strength. Then he bashed his prey's visor in with one final strike of a chakra-covered fist. The prey's body jerked, and it fell backwards on the muddy ground. Silence fell to the woods, broken only by the sound of the harsh breathing of the beast. The rain was practically non-existent now, only a slight drizzle dripping from the gray sky above. Then there was noise behind him, and the Kyuubi turned to see two more robots running towards him. They both stopped dead when they caught a good look at him. The larger white one seemed to shout something at him, but it didn't penetrate the haze of bloodlust and anger clouding Naruto's mind. He would have stalked forwards, would have raced towards them and attempted to tear their metallic limbs off one by one until there would be nothing left but scattered pieces of metal. He would have tried it, wasn't it for the fact that his chakra reserves were rapidly draining, and it was enough for one single fact to enter his brain and slightly nudge the consciousness of the blonde boy's mind to rouse him from the hate-filled slumber his thoughts had ended up in. The ground before him was empty, empty, empty. The red eyes returned into azure ones, and Naruto gasped loudly as he came back to his senses with a rush. His whole body hurt, his arm, his hand and knuckles and legs and back and everything, and he was so very tired. But there was still only one thought in his head as he watched the empty ground in front of him, not noticing RC and Wheeljack rush towards him. His knees gave out and he slumped down to the wet ground, the blood from his arm dripping down and mixing with the mud. His vision started to turn hazy as he stared at the forest floor before him. There still were tracks on the ground, marks of the man who had lain there just a moment ago, Kakashi-sensei. On a cliff not too far from the spot where the blonde-haired human was attempting to wake up his apparently unconscious companion, Soundwave was crouching and intently staring at the two humans down below. He watched as the reinforcements dived from the sky, 3 flyers landing in front of them. The communications chief tilted his head. There were ugly scrapes and dents all over his body, marks from the explosion he had barely managed to escape from. Not completely, but enough not to have ended up in a smoking pile of scrap metal and wreckage. Someone might have snorted at his actions, called him a coward for retreating and leaving Dreadwing behind. That wrecker he had fought against, for example, would probably get even more arrogant after he left the battle. But Soundwave had no interest in such things. Values like honor in battle did not interest him. He was here to fulfill Lord Megatron's orders, not to engage petty quarrels with battle-crazy wreckers. It had been most interesting to watch the gray-haired human dispatch the flyer. It was something the communications chief had never seen before, had never imagined a mere human could do such a thing. But Soundwave was becoming quite certain these were no ordinary humans, not by any standards. He didn't know how the younger one had managed to beat 2 other flyers. Maybe he had similar abilities as his comrade, that lighting-like power he had used to wipe out the flyer. Suddenly there was a flare of something red from down below. Soundwave watched in expressionless awe as a cloak-like flaming red aura started to bubble around the blonde-haired human, enveloping him completely, making him appear nearly beast-like. The sleek Decepticon watched in silence as what could he call it? He didn't like not having clear definitions. Human attacked the flyers, not even minding his injuries, and almost took one of them down with a single blow. Well, this was turning out to be rather fascinating. He watched the boy closely, how he snarled and growled almost animal-like, without any trace of any human awareness, well, any of those Soundwave was aware of. He would be very interesting research material. And that's why he recorded every second of it. But now was not the time to catch the boy, still raging like there was nothing but the fury left in his head, as he was mauling the remaining flyers with nearly startling efficiency. It would be too risky to attempt anything. The other one, instead, he transformed and dove off the cliff. The boy didn't even notice, too busy to beat down the last of the flyers, as he gathered up the unconscious man from the ground and set the coordinates for the nemesis. Chapter 10. RC ran through the dark woods, Wheeljack by her side. The air between them was filled with a growing sense of dreading anticipation. She could still hear that horrible howl in her CPU, like the sound had never left her audio receptors and was just echoing around there. They rushed towards the new sounds of battle that had begun to emanate from the forest not long ago, both fearing what they would soon find. The rain had lessened from the downpour into a slight drizzle, so it was easier to navigate in the gloomy forest. Her blue and pink paint job was already splattered with numerous stains of mud. Wheeljack looked even worse for wear. He had numerous scrapes and wounds left by the battle against both the first lieutenant and the communications chief of the Nemesis. The wrecker looked as grim as she did, blue optics trained at the direction the sounds of battle were emanating from. There was a ground-grumbling crash from ahead and RC narrowed her eyes. She just hoped Naruto and Kakashi could hold their ground until the help arrived. Ratchet, what's the situation there? Wheeljack's voice had a very serious note in it. The wrecker knew when to joke about the matter and when to cut out the nonsense. RC heard the medic's voice through the comlink. I'm about to bridge them back, he said. Any sign of Naruto or Kakashi? No, not yet, she heard him reply, but that'll hopefully change soon. They're not far, she grumbled. Another crash, this time almost thunderous in its volume. Wheeljack was speaking with Ratchet again. We're about to get a visual. Yeah, there is Naruto, what in the… They both stopped dead on their tracks as soon as they saw him. It was Naruto, or at least RC thought so. She stared with wide optics at the weird red smoke-like aura that surrounded the kid, bubbling and moving, almost in the form of some sort of a canine. Yes, she could even see ears and 3 tails. She could see his injuries too. Blood was running down his arm, the limb looking nauseating with the horrible wound. What on Cybertron was that thing? And then he turned to look at them. RC felt the first tendrils of cold fear wrap around her spark, as she stared into the eyes that had earlier been as blue as fresh energon. Now the irises were blood red. She could immediately see there was no human awareness of any kind left in those eyes. It looked like someone had just hit a switch, opening a cage and letting out something twisted and evil to roam around in the kid's mind. She thought about Naruto and his easy, cheerful smiles and enthusiastic rambling. It was like this creature was a completely different being. What in Megatron's rusty exhaust pipe is that? Wheeljack let out. RC could hear Ratchet's voice through the comlink, his words getting increasingly more frantic as either of the Autobots was responding. The Fem's gaze swept over the area. 4 flyers were dead on the ground, the wreckage is still smoking and sending white sparks into the sprinkling rain. Her fingers flexed. There was no doubt of what had happened to them. Her optics swiftly returned to Naruto. She could see his intentions, or at least the strange monster's intentions that seemed to have abducted his body. The thing wasn't looking at them like a predator at its prey. It was staring them like a mindless beast at anything living and moving, something it would rip apart just because it could. RC knew it then. The thing would attack them. It really was just a matter of seconds. The question was whether they could fight it without killing it. The thing still was Naruto, or if they could fight it at all. The time seemed to have slowed down. They had probably stood there just for a moment, but for the blue Autobot it felt like hours. She more felt than saw Wheeljack silently adopting a battle stance, getting ready to fight if necessary. As it very probably would be. Suddenly there was a strange look in the thing's eyes. RC's optics narrowed. It looked like Naruto was staring at the ground approximately in the middle of the distance between him and them, and like it had never even existed, the bubbling cloaky aura started to disappear, vanishing soundlessly into the rain. Naruto blinked, and his eyes regained their azure color again. Naruto! She shouted and was moving again, quickly closing the distance as the blond boy fell to his knees onto the muddy forest floor. Ratchet! She shouted through the comlink. We got Naruto. Send someone to get Mrs. Darby to the base now. How bad is it? Ratchet's concerned voice rang through the link after he had barked orders at someone. He's alive but in bad shape. Hurry! RC knelt in front of the boy. Wheeljack had followed the motorcycle and now stood by her, and raked his gaze around the surrounding woods. Naruto had said something, but so quietly she hadn't caught it. She spoke to him in Japanese, keeping her voice quiet and kind. Naruto? We'll get you back to base soon, you'll be alright. She glanced at Wheeljack. The wrecker was looking uncharacteristically somber, and RC could see the same train of thought in his eyes as she was having at the moment. What had happened? And would it happen again? But right now, she told herself, there was just a badly injured human kid in front of them. They couldn't not help. Kakashi-sensei. RC's optics widened and her gaze snapped back to Naruto. What? She breathed. Kakashi-sensei, he was right there. Naruto began to sound slightly hysterical. He was right there, unconscious, and now he's gone. The last words came out in a raspy whisper. RC suddenly realized why the boy had stared at the ground with that horrified look in his eyes. She looked at Wheeljack again. Soundwave, the wrecker spat out. RC closed her optics for a short while. The situation was getting worse and worse at every passing moment. We'll get him back, Naruto, don't worry, she said, but the teenager had already passed out from blood loss and exhaustion, his body slumping forwards. RC carefully caught him and straightened, holding the boy in her arms. The dark forest was momentarily illuminated by the green glow of a ground bridge that was opening not too far from them. Soon Optimus Prime and Smokescreen stepped out from the vortex. Whoa, what happened here? Smokescreen exclaimed, his gaze sweeping over the bodies of the dead flyers and the clear signs of battle that were scattered around the place. Pieces of metal, tracks on the ground, splintered tree trunks. And of course the blood-stained and unconscious boy held in RC's arms. Prime was quickly by their side, one forearm transformed into a blaster as he silently observed the surroundings before focusing his attention to them. What is the status? He asked. The cons apparently got Kakashi, Wheeljack said grimly. As for what happened here, we really don't know what was going on, RC concluded. Optimus nodded gravely. Bumblebee and Bulkhead are on their way to Jasper. They will bring the children and Mrs. Darby to the base. RC nodded, her mouth a straight line. Naruto was limp as a rag doll in her arms. Let's get going then, she said. Ratchet, we're ready for a ground bridge, Optimus said, and soon the swirling vortex appeared before them again. Smokescreen hurried to them from where he had been inspecting the offline flyers. Was that Naruto who? Not now, Smokescreen. Her words were clipped as she stepped into the green glow, and soon arrived to the base where a very worried-looking Ratchet stood by the switch and waited for them all to make it through the portal. As soon as Smokescreen, coming in last, had gotten his both feet into the floor of the base, the medic shut down the bridge, then hurried to them. Where's Kakashi? He asked, optics taking in everyone present and realizing who was missing. Taken by Soundwave, probably, Wheeljack said, crossing his arms. Ratchet shut his optics momentarily, nodded jerkily, and then focused his attention to Naruto. Bring him here, he said shortly, beckoning for RC to follow him. The rest of the Autobots trailed after them, and RC laid Naruto down on the same ascetic bed Raph 2 had once occupied when hurt. They gathered around him, everyone silent for a moment as they waited for Jack's mother to arrive. Ratchet seemed to be inspecting the young ninja's wounded arm, blue optics narrowed. Smokescreen was standing beside the white medic, looking a little helpless, eyes trained on the blood still sluggishly bleeding from the deep gashes. Looks bad, their newest recruit mumbled. RC silently agreed. Humans always looked bad when injured. Their bodies seemed to be so soft and fragile that she couldn't help but wonder what would be too much for them to endure. And the blood, the alarming color of red staining everything and looking even darker against the boy's pale skin. RC momentarily tore her gaze from the hurt kid, glancing at Smokescreen. She only now took in the scrapes littering his white paint job. She felt bad for nearly forgetting they had been fighting too. So the beacon was just a trick? Yeah. Smokescreen sighed. We got there easily enough and took a look around. And suddenly he waved his arm. The place is swarming with Insecticons. Took us forever to thin out their lot so we could be bridged back without a bunch of them tailing us to the base. Wheeljack was nodding. Back there, at first Soundwave was the only one. Then that heap of scrap metal went and called for reinforcements. The wrecker snorted, and that was something he apparently did only after seeing Naruto there too. Ratchet snapped, glaring at the white wrecker's new battle scars. And didn't I just finish fixing you? I'd like to see you after a fight with both Dreadwing and Soundwave, Doc, Wheeljack growled. Ratchet glowered at him but kept silent as they all saw that Optimus had one finger pressed beside his audio receptor, receiving something through the comlink. Thank you, Bulkhead, he said and lowered his hand. Bulkhead is coming to the base with Mrs. Darby. Bumblebee is attempting to keep the children out of the base for a short period. It would be unwise to let them see Naruto in his current state. RC nodded somberly. Better not to frighten the kids yet. There was a sound of engines roaring and Bulkhead raced to the base, tires screeching as the green truck came to a halt in the middle of the room. The car's door to the passenger's seat was quickly pushed open and June Darby hurried out, medical bag held tightly in her right hand. She was pale but looked determined, her brow furrowed as she glared at Team Prime. Bulkhead kindly explained the situation to me in advance, she snapped. What is with you Autobots and your ability to gather children here and then get them injured? RC wondered how much Bulkhead, who had quickly transformed and joined the others, looking at Naruto shockingly, had actually told Jack's mother. Probably not everything, because the dark-haired woman might have looked a little more shaken if told that there was a wounded ninja kid from another dimension waiting for medical attention in the Autobot base. But then again, RC thought as she watched Mrs. Darby to hurry to Naruto's bedside and start to inspect the wound. She was a nurse and as their own medical staff member probably had the invaluable ability to push everything else aside and concentrate on saving lives, and giving a good telling off to the ones responsible for her patient's injuries, of course. I don't know how I'm able to let Jack and his friends run along with you, Prime, she seethed, kneeling beside her bag to gather the needed equipment and pull latex gloves over her hands. I knew it. Someday one of them will get badly hurt. And now you have another child here, passed out from blood loss. RC remembered the red eyes of the monster, looking straight at them with nothing but bloodlust in its mind. She felt the heavy gaze of Wheeljack on her shortly. Soon they'd had to tell the others what had happened, but she knew Optimus would want to wait for Naruto himself to explain things, and now it was not the time to press anyone about the matter. And he was on a battlefield. She bristled from anger but her hands were completely steady as she disinfected the deep wounds. Anyone care to tell me why there was a child of 15 running around there? He could have been. The kid had been holed up here for a whole week, Wheeljack let out. And he's you. June pointed an accusing finger at the wrecker, and Wheeljack managed to look somewhat taken aback, clearly not used to being scolded by human mothers. Bulkhead told me how he got there in the first place. You should have sent him back as soon as you noticed he had come along. Wheeljack looked like he was about to retaliate but Optimus held up his hand. Now it is not the time for accusations. How is Naruto's status? The last words were directed at the still woman glaring at Wheeljack and then dropping her attention back to Naruto. As you can see, his arm is seriously injured, she said sharply. I'll need to take him to the... Suddenly she frowned, leaning down to examine the wound again. What is it? RC asked. Well, June looked rather perplexed, straightening her back. I was about to say that he needs surgery. The tendons and muscles were badly torn. But, she paused for a moment, they appeared to be already healing. What? Ratchet blurted, stepping closer. How is that possible? It shouldn't be, Mrs. Darby said. The wounds were very grave. Normally they would take a long time to heal but, she trailed off, and then raised her gaze at Optimus. But the tissue has already started healing. For a moment, she looked to be at complete loss. Then there are his hands. The knuckles were looking rather battered but otherwise okay, and like they had been healing for a short time already. Okay? RC though, dumbfounded. But it had seemed like he had been fighting the cons barehanded. But there had been that strange thing floating around him. RC met Wheeljack's gaze. We might have an idea what could be causing it, she said slowly. June frowned, looking at her. Optimus met her gaze. We will talk about that later, Prime decided. For now we should just accept what is happening and make sure he will recover. Mrs. Darby nodded, lips pursed, but she gathered more equipment from her large bag and started to stitch and dress up the wound. She was quick and efficient, and soon the flow of blood was stifled and Naruto's arm was securely bandaged. She was in the middle of making him an arm sling when the boy's eyes suddenly snapped open. With a gasp, Naruto sat up like someone had given him an electric shock and winced after the sharp movement. June let out a sound of surprise and took a step back as Naruto looked wildly around. Hey, it's alright, you're safe, she said with a kind voice. Naruto stared at her, clearly struggling to understand her words. Unfortunately, Naruto doesn't yet understand English very well, Prime explained. He only speaks Japanese for now. Japanese? June blinked in surprise. So Bulkhead hadn't told that much to Jack's mother after all. Naruto's gaze quickly swept over everyone in the room. Who is she? He asked in Japanese, eyes now trained on Mrs. Darby. June Darby, Jack's mother, RC explained. We called her here as soon as we found you injured. She took care of your arm. Oh. Naruto looked down at the bandages. Then he looked at Mrs. Darby, who was looking at her patient with apparent doctor's eye. "Thank you," Naruto said in English. His pronunciation was a little off but clear enough for June to understand. She smiled warmly at him. "Does it hurt?" she asked gently in English, very lightly tapping his bandaged arm. Naruto caught her meaning and shook his head. "I am fine," he said. He then swung his legs over the edge of the bed. "You shouldn't," June tried, but Naruto was already looking at RC and then at Wheeljack. "Where's Kakashi-sensei?" he asked in Japanese again, voice tight. There was a sound of cars speeding through the tunnel. "Mrs. Darby, could you please inform the children of Naruto's situation? They must be worried," Prime said to June, who had been looking at Naruto, brow deeply furrowed. "There is a matter of high importance we need to discuss with Naruto. And," he said when she seemed ready to object, "we will make sure he rests properly afterwards." June closed her mouth and nodded curtly. She smiled at Naruto, and then walked to the teenagers who were currently climbing out from the yellow-black Urbana 500. RC returned his attention back to Naruto, who was looking uncharacteristically serious. "Kakashi has probably been taken to the Decepticon ship. Wheeljack said Soundwave has kidnapped other humans before, so it could have been him. He was absent from our battle at the time." Naruto nodded shortly. There was a pained look in his blue eyes. His eyes drifted from Wheeljack to RC. "Did I?" he swallowed. "Did I kill anyone when I was?" Bulkhead and Ratchet looked beyond shocked. Others were silent for a moment. "You took out a bunch of flyers. That seems to be all," RC replied. "Oh, Kakashi-sensei got the one who did this," he beckoned at his arm. "And I took out a couple of them before that, but..." He hung his head a little. "What do you mean you took out a couple of flyers?" Bulkhead asked, baffled. Ratchet opened his mouth, and then shut it again, blinking. Smokescreen seemed equally astonished. "I believe it has now become very important for you to properly explain the situation," Optimus Prime said. Naruto nodded curtly, flexing the fingers of his good hand. "And will you help me save Kakashi-sensei?" the young ninja asked first. Wheeljack snorted, crossing his arms. "What do you think we are, some Decepticon scum? Of course we'll get the little man back." He flashed him a smile. "You don't abandon a member of the band, after all." Naruto smiled for the first time. "Thanks," he said. He rolled his shoulders and winced slightly as he accidentally moved his bad arm. There was a grimace of pain in his eyes, but brighter as there burned a flame of determination. "So, this might take a while." Megatron stood at the bridge of the Nemesis, towering over the doctor, first lieutenant, and the communications chief of his crew, and staring at them expectantly. Not the good kind of expectantly, rather than "if you fail to tell me anything useful you will be thrown off the ship, you worthless pieces of scrap metal" kind of expectantly. Such looks rarely summoned confidence in his subordinates, but this time the three in front of him seemed to be rather pleased with themselves, even the blank-visored Soundwave. "Well?" the leader of the Decepticons asked in a menacing voice. "Lord Megatron, we are happy to inform you that we have successfully seized one of the Autobots' new human pets." Knockout's voice had a clear note of pride in it, and the sleek red racer looked insufferably smug. "And no thanks to you, Doctor," Megatron growled, making Knockout take a half a step back. Megatron threw an ugly look at the race-enthusiastic Decepticon, and turned his attention to his two other subordinates. "But I am most pleased with your work," he said. The plan with the false beacon and insect-icon ambush had fled his mind as soon as Soundwave had contacted him, informing him that there was a single Autobot near the Energon mine the communications chief had been examining, accompanied by the new human child, and the other one had soon stormed to the place, ready to save his companion. "Almost too easy. Soon we can interrogate him. I was the one who took him to the cargo bin," Knockout muttered. Megatron looked at him murderously, and the doctor quieted down so his master could continue. "And he will tell us how two humans managed to dispatch an entire team of Viacons." His eyes flashed dangerously. His gaze then focused on Soundwave, who stood as silently as always beside Dreadwing. "Soundwave, I believe you have something to show me." The communications chief nodded and stalked to the computers. After a moment the screens flickered on and there was a video footage of a forest shown there. It started playing immediately. The Decepticons present took a step forwards to get a better look. Megatron watched as the smaller one of the newly arrived humans, human children did look so pathetic, attempted to wake up the other one. There was a dead flyer lying on the ground not far from them. Megatron frowned. The flyer was missing a head. Clearly it was one of the two insects covering on the ground that had done it, but Megatron just couldn't understand how two mere humans had succeeded in it. And without using any of those modern weapons the inhabitants of this sorry planet usually favored in order to appear tough. Then three other Viacons dived from the sky and landed in front of the humans. The small one tried to protect the unconscious one, planting himself in front of the man lying on the ground. Megatron's smile was nearly an ugly snarl. It seemed the humans were as foolish as the Autobots themselves, busy to sacrifice themselves in every possible direction. Fools! One of the Viacons was approaching the boy, and then Megatron's red optics widened as he watched the boy turn into some kind of a weird beast, red bubbling cloud coming from nowhere and engulfing him. The boy seemed to growl and then, with clearly improved strength and speed and mindlessness to his injuries, attacked the closest Viacon. They watched as the flyer was sent sprawling back and hit a tree with a force great enough to destroy the tree trunk. Did he just? Knockout's voice was flabbergasted. Megatron narrowed his eyes and watched as the kid took out the second flyer like it was nothing. The veil of red around it seemed to spike and grow. The view angle changed as Soundwave changed his position and sped towards the battleground. Momentarily they got a closer look as the thing laid chaos in the middle of the woods. The boy didn't even notice as Soundwave seized the unconscious masked man lying on the muddy forest floor. Then the footage stopped. Knockout was opening and closing his mouth, and Dreadwing's eyes were wide, though he still managed to look as grim as always. Soundwave only tilted his head a little. Megatron smiled. "Thank you, Soundwave," he said silkily. "The new information you managed to gather has been most interesting." The leader of the Nemesis let out a laugh that echoed around the bridge and started to walk towards the door to the corridors. "Maybe we should go and see if our guest is awake. I'm sure he will have a lot to tell us."